Sinister soft drinks. This is actually a PowerPoint presentation I made back when I was in college with some other students. It's pretty revealing what you can find out on soft drinks and just the general food that we're consuming in this country. So I'll get ahead in the presentation. It might be 2 videos, but anyway, we'll go on from there. Goals of this presentation. The goal of this presentation is to make the public aware of the current substances in soft drinks and the political issues surrounding them. We are consumers and have the power to vote with our dollars. If we choose to drink healthier, beverage companies will respond. The purpose of this presentation is not to order you to stop drinking modern soft drinks, but to help you become an informed consumer and hold on to your health. Why do we drink soda? Soda is cheap compared to other options. Soft drinks are everywhere. The caffeine rush helps us work. Most soft drinks are provided cold and refreshing. Sodas have a variety of flavors. You look cool drinking a soda. We are forced to consume soft drinks at most restaurants and locations. They're also addicting and filling. One of the first problems we have to deal with is the sweeteners. The first sweetener we're going to discuss is high fructose corn syrup, particularly starting off with its issues with mercury. Mercury was found in many soft drinks that contain high fructose corn syrup. Mercury destroys brain cells or neurons, essentially in a self-sustaining reaction that keeps on going until it's finally eliminated out of your body. Researchers led by René Default, who was working at the FDA at the time, found that mercury was in nearly 50%, 9 out of 20 samples of commercial high fructose corn syrup they tested back in 2005. Researchers tested 55 popular branded foods and drinks where high fructose corn syrup was either the second or first highest labeled ingredient. Nearly 1/3 of them contained trace amounts of mercury. Brands included those made by Quaker, Hershey's, Kraft, Smuckers, all big names in the U.S. Another issue with high fructose corn syrup is toxins. High fructose corn syrup can turn into hydroxymethylfurfural, or HMF. When you cook high fructose corn syrup, it becomes contaminated with HMF. HMF jumped dramatically when temperatures rose above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Studies have linked HMF to DNA damage in humans. HMF also breaks down in the body to other substances which are potentially more harmful than HMF. Another issue with high fructose corn syrup is genetically modified corn. Monsanto corn caused liver and kidney failure in rats, thus is banned in many nations. In addition, some effects on the heart, adrenal system, spleen, blood cells were also frequently noted. Monsanto is portrayed negatively in most documentaries, not just due to its poisonous products, but to general business practices. Since I actually made this slide, I've learned a bit more on genetically modified organisms, and they've had a lot more significant effects on the animals that ate them. There's been a study that recently was released where rats had essentially golf ball sized tumors. Alright, animals that eat genetically modified foods, essentially anywhere ranging from 1 to 3 generations, will become sterile. Their fertility drops. The births of the animals that ate genetically modified foods, many of them actually were stillborn. They had animals that were halfway births or just early deliveries. They had animals that were blind and deaf at birth. They also had smaller genitals. There was an issue where animals actually had lung lesions. Developed cancer in various organs and had various problems with the chemical systems of their body. It just goes on and on with genetically modified foods. One of the points I constantly bring up is that genetically modified crops, many of them are producing pesticides actually in the crops themselves, that when bugs eat the crops, they die. Therefore, what are the crops doing to you? Just an important thing to remember. Another issue with high fructose corn syrup is the digestion cycle. Yale University showed that diets heavy in high fructose corn syrup can lead to insulin resistance. Fructose reduces the effects of insulin, which is the hallmark of type 2 diabetes. Essentially, the body needs to pump out more insulin to work with high fructose corn syrup than it would if it had to deal with normal glucose. The livers of test animals fed large amounts of fructose developed fatty deposits and cirrhosis, similar to the problems of livers of alcoholics. Another problem with digestion, as it goes down through this slide, high fructose corn syrup robs the body of micronutrient treasures in order to assimilate itself for use. High fructose corn syrup contains a great deal of free or unbounded fructose. Research indicates that this supposed free fructose interferes with the body's use of key minerals like magnesium, copper, and chromium. Fructose browns in food 7 times faster than glucose, resulting in a decrease in protein quality and also an increase in toxicity. Anytime you essentially take a food that has a lot of calories or carbohydrates and you heat it up, you start forming a material known as acrylamide. Acrylamide is highly toxic and is actually a neurotoxin. In 1980, the average person ate 39 pounds of fructose and 84 pounds of sucrose. In 1994, the average person ate 66 pounds of sucrose and 83 pounds of fructose. So we're actually eating more of the bad stuff in a sense. Today, approximately 25% of our average caloric intake comes from sugars, with the larger fraction being fructose. Now, this is a very, very controversial sweetener we have here, aspartame. It's an artificial sweetener that is essentially 0 calorie. Aspartame is a controversial sweetener linked to brain tumors, neurological conditions, and lupus, which is essentially your body attacking itself, an autoimmune disease. In its raw form, aspartame has been linked to synapse issues and DNA damage, essentially brain issues. In 1988, get this, 80% of voluntary submitted complaints about additives were actually on aspartame. Small amounts of insulin are released when you digest aspartame, which could lead to insulin resistance and diabetes. To break that down, essentially your body starts tasting something sweet and it expects a certain amount of calories. When it doesn't have calories, the insulin just simply flows throughout your body, and your body has to adapt to more insulin. It's like people who are on prescription drugs. After so many years, many times they have to increase their dose because the body develops a resistance. Aspartame. This is actually the actual molecule of aspartame. As you see, it's made of essentially aspartic acid, phenylalanine, and methanol. All right. One of the things I learned after making this presentation is that aspartame today is produced by genetically modified E. coli bacteria. So essentially this bacteria, which has brought up so many food recalls due to the damage it does to the human body, now has been genetically modified to produce aspartame as its fecal matter. Its excrement, its feces is aspartame, what you're eating. Aspartame in its own form can be addictive, but it's literally fecal matter from a genetically modified organism. I just thought that was something you'd find interesting. Alright, dangerous sweetener aspartame, aspartic acid. Aspartame is made up of 40% aspartic acid, 50% phenylalanine, and 10% methyl esters. Aspartic acid is a chemical which excites brain cells to the point of burning out, therefore known as an excitotoxin. Studies of such chemicals caused the ban of MSG in baby food. James Turner, a participant in the decision to essentially eliminate MSG in baby food, is also highly critical of aspartame. Dangerous sweetener aspartame, phenylalanine. Phenylalanine is about 50% of aspartame and is an amino acid of life, but in too much quantities is a neurotoxin and can lead to the body to develop a surplus of norepinephrine. In the time of digestion, aspartame and its phenylalanine forms into chemicals, particularly dictotipeprazine, which can cause basically tumors in high amounts. If you ever seen the back of a drink container that says phenylalanine, it says Warner, phenylucnics, this contains phenylalanine. Some people actually have, it's almost like, what's that term? An allergy to phenylalanine, or at least sensitive to it in high quantities, so they can become sick. So that's why the law regulates that label. Dangerous sweetener number 2, aspartame methyl esters. Aspartame is 10% methyl esters, which turns into the poisonous methanol when inside the body. The body tries to digest the methanol and thus, unfortunately, converts it to the even more poisonous formaldehyde. Methanol is an alcohol-based race fuel, and formaldehyde is actually used to kill bacteria in preserved animals. Dangerous sweetener aspartame, a poisonous past. Alright, I'm going to try running through this. In 1965, aspartame was discovered by a scientist working on ulcer medications, but licked his finger and noticed that the substance was relatively sweet. In 1970, Surly Corporation had tested the results of aspartame. After a 52-week study on 7 monkeys, they found seizures in 5 and 1 death of cardiac arrest. A study in mice was then later taken up by Dr. John W. Olney and also found similar conditions of tumors and deaths. In 1974, the FDA, unaware of the findings, had awarded aspartame limited use in food, but soon word had traveled on to the FDA. In 1975, the FDA commissioned studies into aspartame and the Surly Corporation. And it goes here, 90 key studies were to be done by Surly themselves. This gets interesting. In order to try to keep the results valid, because you can't have the company selling the product do their own, investigations, the FDA had ordered that the results be inspected by third parties. But unfortunately, the third parties were selected and paid by the Surly Corporation. 1976, the FDA was brought into question all of J.D. Surly's aspartame testing procedures. The final FDA report noted illegal criminal activity. In 1977, the FDA requested U.S. Attorney Samuel Skinner of Chicago be hired to investigate Surly's aspartame testing procedures. In 1977, Skinner had met with the Surly's attorneys at the Chicago law firm of Sidney and Austin. Actually, in a change of face, he left his post for a job at the very law firm he was supposed to be investigating. All right. In 1977, the replacement to Mr. Skinner was U.S. Attorney William Conlon, who essentially sat on the case even though Surly Company was falsifying NutraSweet test data. In 1979, guess what? He decided to join Surly's law firm as well. In 1977, Donald Rumsfeld served as the Chief Executive Officer, President, and then Chairman of the Surly Corporation, and had brought in several special assistants to help the failing company. In 1980, aspartame is banned by law via the FDA. In 1981, Ronald Reagan was the president, appointing Rumsfeld as special envoy to the Middle East, and Arthur Hall Hayes Jr., a friend of Rumsfeld, to the position of FDA commissioner. Over one day, Surly Corporation submitted a proposal for aspartame to be added back into food, essentially one day after you had a new appointment. In 1981, Reagan signs an executive order keeping the former FDA commissioner from making any decisions. In 1981, Arthur Hall Hayes Jr., the new commissioner, oversaw the decision on aspartame. At first, a ban looked to hold, with a 3 versus 2 vote. But Hayes then added another panel member. The vote was a tie, and then in order to break the tie, he voted to approve aspartame for food use. 1981, aspartame is okayed for use in dry foods. 1983, aspartame is okayed for use in beverages like soft drinks. In 1983, in November, 2 months after leaving the FDA, Hayes was hired by Burson Marsteller, the chief public relations firm for both Monsanto and J.D. Surly, at a paycheck of $1,000 a day. Today, reports like the Brussels report of the FDA and the 146-page CDC report on aspartame showed that there were clear problems in the use of the sweetener. Sucralose, Splenda, probably one of the most popular sweeteners out there. They say it's more natural because it's made from sugar. Well, it's an artificial sweetener. Essentially, Splenda, or sucralose, the chemical name, was designed as an ant poison via a bond in a sugar molecule, where essentially they popped off the hydrogen and added a chlorine. This is an organochlorine, similar to Agent Orange, one of the most toxic substances known to man. Sucralose was discovered essentially in 1976 by scientists working on producing an insecticide for a large sugar refinery, Tate & Lyle. A college student was told to test the powder, but misheard and thought he was told to taste it. The compound was sweet, and history was written. Here's another interesting sweetener. Acesulfame potassium, commonly referred to as ACE-K. The sweetener was discovered in 1967 by a German chemist. The sweetener was approved by the FDA in 1988 as a sugar substitute based on its acceptance in other countries. ACE-K stimulates an insulin secretion in a dose-dependent fashion, therefore possibly aggravating reactive low blood sugar attacks. ACE-K apparently produced, get this, lung tumors, breast tumors, and rare types of tumors in other organs, such as the thymus gland, and several forms of leukemia and chronic respiratory disease in several rodent studies. Dichloromethane is produced from digestion, is used to actually chemically weld certain plastics. Dichloromethane is metabolized by the body to a level as far as carbon monoxide, which is dangerous as well. Dichloromethane has been linked to cancer of the lungs, liver, and pancreas in laboratory animals. The European Union has banned the use of dichloromethane in paint strippers, and also a breakdown product, acetoacetamide, has been known to affect the thyroid. Now this is where we start getting even more interesting into issues. Bisphenol A. I'm going to end the video here so I can break it up into 2 parts, and we'll start later talking about the actual packaging of soft drinks. This is the second part of Sinister soft drinks, essentially how soda is poison and is killing you. We'll start off by talking about packaging worries. Bisphenol A, slide 1. Bisphenol A has been suspected of being hazardous to humans since the 1930s. Bisphenol A has caused reverse sexual development in the brains of lab animals and general sexual behavior, as well as an increase in prostate and breast cancer risk. Bisphenol A is an endocrine disruptor, a phthalate and a xenoestrogen, which can mimic the body's own hormones and block receptors. This may lead to negative health effects. Boys born to mothers with the highest levels of phthalates were 7 times more likely to have a shortened anogenital distance, essentially the distance between the anus and the genitals, and were more likely to experience incomplete testicular descent and smaller overall genital size. Slide 2. A 2008 review has concluded that obesity may be an increased function of bisphenol A exposure. They actually quoted merits concern among scientists and public health officials. A 2008 review has concluded that the neonatal exposure, the exposure essentially the period immediately after birth up to a time period of 1 month, to bisphenol A can affect sexually dimorphic brain development. Essentially what they're trying to say is that male brains became female brains and female brains became male brains. A 2008 review concluded that BPA, bisphenol A, altered the hippocampus, a part of the brain that has to do with memory, and with so many people getting Alzheimer's, it's something to be worried about. A 2005 review concluded that prenatal, the time period before birth, and neonatal exposure to BPA in mice can act on the dopamine systems, resulting in the supersensitivity to drugs of abuse, also hyperlocomotion. With so many people experiencing hyperactivity, this is another concern. A 2007 review concluded that bisphenol A has been shown to bind to the thyroid hormone receptor and perhaps have selective effects on its functions. Studies have suggested that BPA could promote the growth of cancer cells. A 2010 study concluded that BPA essentially could promote invasion and reproduction of cancer cells through the overexpression of certain proteins as well as decreased effects of other proteins. In this slide you see aluminum cans. The one prior you saw plastic bottles. Plastic bottles that can be clear and many times also bottles which aren't clear, and not just those which are being used to store soft drinks, essentially contain bisphenol A. If it's clear, it's got bisphenol A. If it doesn't, there's a good chance that it might. It's not just soda that has this problem. In aluminum cans, you might believe you are safe, but by law, all cans, it can be soda cans or it could be a soup can, needs to have a liner. And guess what that liner is made out of? Bisphenol A. It's not that aluminum would be much better for you. Alright, just look into the health effects of aluminum. It's something also to be worried about. Bisphenol A by the numbers. At 0.025 micrograms per kilogram, there are permanent changes in the genital tract, changes in the breast tissue that predispose those cells to hormones and carcinogens. At 1 microgram per kilogram, BPA exposure caused long-term adverse reproductive and carcinogenic effects. A fancy way of saying you're going to get cancer. At 2 micrograms per kilogram, a 1997 study showed an increase in prostate weight by 30%. At 2.4 micrograms per kilogram, there is a decline in testicular testosterone. At 2.5 micrograms per kilogram, breast cells were predisposed to cancer. At 10 micrograms per kilogram, prostate cells were more sensitive to hormones and cancer. There was a decrease in maternal behavior. A 2005 study in mice found that neonatal BPA exposure disrupted the development of the fetal mouse prostate. A 2006 study in rats showed that the neonatal exposure increases prostate gland susceptibility to adult-onset precancerous lesions and hormonal carcinogenesis. Carcinogenesis is essentially a word meaning the creation of cancer. A 2009 study found that low dose actually could increase prostate cancer susceptibility when animals were adults. At 30 micrograms per kilogram, there was a reverse in the normal sex differences in brain structure and behavior. At 50 micrograms per kilogram, there was reverse neurological effects in primates. There was a disruption in ovarian development in mice, and actually permanently altered the hypothalamic estrogen-dependent mechanisms that govern the sexual behavior in the adult female rat. A 2007 study found that bisphenol A within the range of concentrations currently measured in human plasma is associated with a permanent increase in prostate size. Prenatal exposure to bisphenol A actually affected the behavior of sexual differentiation in male monkeys. Essentially, you had male monkeys engaging in behavior that's more attributed to female monkeys. Bisphenol A exposure disrupted the blood testis barrier when administered to immature but not to adult rats. Exposure to bisphenol A in the workplace could produce sexual dysfunction in the male adult human. The measure of bisphenol A currently in our workplace could actually already be taking a great effect on us. After this slide was made, there was a study where essentially there's some similarities between frogs and human beings, and they administered bisphenol A to frogs and found that the male and females both developed reproductive organs of the opposite sex, essentially becoming hermaphrodites. Another issue with soft drinks are the preservatives, sodium benzoate in particular. Let's start off with a quote from a Coca-Cola spokesperson. We've looked at removing sodium benzoate for a number of years and a move towards having no artificial additives. Our decision is based on emerging consumer trends for natural. Sodium benzoate, known in the European Union as E211, and its other forms, potassium benzoate E212 and calcium benzoate E213, are preservatives that have a very controversial use in modern foods, beverages, and several cough medicines. In combination with citric acid or any acid like carbonic acid, which is essentially carbonated water, sodium benzoate will form benzene. Heat and light from the sun as well as shelf life will also affect the rate at which benzene is formed. It's a foregone conclusion, it's just a matter of time. Sodium benzoate by itself can damage and inactivate vital parts of DNA in a cell's mitochondria, hence aging. There are many illnesses now tied to DNA damage, including Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases. Benzene is a chemical that's been used as a fuel additive, was found in many consumer products such as paint strippers, rubber cements, and spot removers due to its solvent capabilities. It's been removed over the years because it's a known carcinogen that also can cause leukemia. Let's have a word from the CDC. Benzene works by causing cells not to work correctly. For example, it can cause bone marrow not to produce enough red blood cells, which can lead to anemia. Also, it can damage the immune system by changing blood levels of antibodies and causing the loss of white blood cells. Researchers at the University of North Carolina of Public Health concluded that benzene was linked to many forms of leukemia. Scientific studies indicate that workers who use benzene solvents are at risk of developing cancer and blood diseases from exposure to benzene. Perrier water, a pretty much respectful luxury brand of bottled water, was sampled in 1990. Several times they reported high levels of benzene. The amount of benzene contamination ranged from 12.3 to 19.9 parts per billion. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency has established maximum contamination level of only 5 parts per billion of benzene in public drinking supplies. So essentially your public drinking water, your run-of-the-mill average tap water, all right, it has a safe level which is by far was exceeded by benzene in Perrier water. All right. The widely used food preservative sodium benzoate has been linked to hyperactivity in children, according to a study from British researchers. Also, there's a push to phase out sodium benzoate in the European Union. Further studies have suggested that high intake of sodium benzoate could lead to diminished IQ of up to 5.5 points. Sodium benzoate has been used as a bacteriostatic and a fungostat, and is also one of the key ingredients in a drug known as amoniol, which is actually used to decrease the amount of ammonia in the body. Something to be concerned about. Another interesting thing is you want to know how sodium benzoate works as a preservative. It actually destroys DNA. That's how it destroys bacteria. But anyway, one of the things you have to be concerned about is that during the course of me and several students creating this presentation, we found a lot more information that we just didn't have time to share. At this point, this was the end of the PowerPoint. We had an interactive session with the class, but there was still information we had to leave out. All right, you can look at, let's say, the artificial colors and dyes. Most of them are made from coal or other petrochemicals and have been linked to hyperactivity, obesity, and cancer, and many other things. You also have to be concerned about natural flavors. Really, how natural are they? Many natural flavors are encased in alcohol, glycerin, or gelatin from genetically modified organisms. Sometimes natural flavoring is just a throw word for MSG. I've actually talked to people in the soda industry and soft drink industry while I was making this report, and they share concern with me that they really would like to produce natural, healthy beverages, but the way the corporations control the market, they would be out of business if they tried. It's no longer cost effective. The government subsidizes corn sugar, so that's what everyone's forced to use. Another interesting thing is that when they switched from using saccharin, an artificial sweetener, to aspartame, all right, saccharin was known to cause cancer, and as you've seen, aspartame isn't exactly much healthier. They actually said that their machines, the O-rings in the machines, were being eaten up as if an acid was added to them. It was only in the diet sodas, so it was only the sodas which had aspartame that were damaging their machines. They didn't know what was causing it, but it's something they were worried about. I could keep on going and talking about, what's in our food nowadays, but I figured I'll end this video here. Take care.